Brazil, the land of samba, sunshine, and enough currency since the 1940s to make your head spin faster than a top in the hands of a sugared-up toddler. We're going on a wild ride through Brazil's economic history, and trust me, you're going to want a stiff drink and possibly an abacus to keep up. We're talking hyperinflation, government upheaval, and more currency changes than a Wall Street trader makes before his third divorce. From the race to the real and everything in between, Brazil's monetary policy reads like a choose-your-own-adventure novel written by someone who really hates stable economies. So buckle up, because we're about to dive headfirst into the wacky world of Brazilian currency, where the only constant is change. And the only guarantee is that whatever they're using now, they'll probably change it again in a few years. Let's start with a comparatively recent event, the introduction of the real in 1994. I know, saying 1994 was recent is like saying your uncle's pet rock is vintage, but trust me, in Brazilian currency terms, this is practically yesterday. Picture it, Brazil, 1994. Hyperinflation is running rampant, the government's economic policies are about as effective as a chocolate fireguard, and the Cruzeiro Real is about as valuable as a used napkin at a barbecue. Enter Fernando Henrique Cardoso, brandishing a shiny new currency like a knight in shining armor, or at least a politician in a reasonably priced suit. The real was pegged to the US dollar, which, let's be honest, is about as stable as a currency gets. It was a bold move, a risky move, and for once it actually worked. Inflation plummeted, the economy stabilized, and Brazilians everywhere breathed a collective sigh of relief. For a while, at least. Now you might be thinking, hold on, what about that Cruzeiro Real you mentioned earlier? Good catch. See, the Cruzeiro Real was like that awkward middle child of Brazilian currency. Introduced in 1993, it was supposed to be a stepping stone to economic stability, a sort of Cruzeiro light, if you will. The problem was, nobody told the Brazilian economy that. Inflation remained stubbornly high, and the Cruzeiro Real quickly became about as popular as a case of the Mondays. It was clear that something more drastic was needed, which is where our friend the real came in to save the day, or at least try to. Think of the Cruzeiro Real as that friend who crashes on your couch for a couple of weeks, eats all your food, and then disappears without a trace. You're not really sure what their deal was, but you're definitely glad they're gone. The Cruzeiro, the currency that just wouldn't quit. Introduced in 1942, the Cruzeiro replaced the Réis, which, spoiler alert, we'll be talking about later. The Cruzeiro was supposed to usher in a new era of economic stability, but instead it presided over decades of, well, the exact opposite. We're talking hyperinflation, economic crises, and enough currency devaluations to make your head spin. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, except instead of a car, it was the Brazilian economy. And instead of crashing, it was just slowly bursting into flames. Despite its best efforts, or perhaps because of them, the Cruzeiro became synonymous with economic instability. Let's rewind the clock even further, shall we? Back to a time when Brazil was a Portuguese colony, and the currency of the land was the Réis. Now, the Réis had a pretty good run, lasting from the 16th to the early 20th century. It was used for everything from buying slaves, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms, to trading with Europe. But like all good things, the reign of the Réis eventually came to an end. By the early 20th century, the Réis was facing some stiff competition from, well, pretty much every other major currency in the world. Inflation was on the rise, and the Réis was starting to look about as modern as a powdered wig. Something had to give, and that something was the introduction of the Cruzeiro in 1942. Now, if you thought the transition from Réis to Cruzeiro was confusing, buckle up, because it's about to get a whole lot weirder. See, during its twilight years, the Réis decided to spawn a new, even more confusing currency, the mil Réis. As the name suggests, 1 mil Réis was equal to, wait for it, 1,000 Réis. Yes, you heard that right. Instead of just simplifying things and issuing new currency denominations, they decided to add another layer of complexity to an already confusing situation. It was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline-soaked confetti. Unsurprisingly, the mil Réis didn't last very long, eventually being replaced by, you guessed it, the Cruzeiro. But hey, at least it gave economists something to scratch their heads about for a few years. No currency is complete without its trusty sidekick, the subunit. And in the case of the Cruzeiro, that sidekick was the centavo. Now the centavo was like that well-meaning but ultimately ineffective friend who's always tagging along. It tried its best to keep up with the Cruzeiro, but with all the inflation and economic turmoil, it was fighting a losing battle. Imagine trying to pay for a cup of coffee with a handful of dust. That's basically what it was like trying to use centavos during the height of Brazil's economic woes. Eventually, the centavo went the way of the dodo, becoming about as relevant as a Betamax player in a world of streaming services. Now, amidst all this talk of economic turmoil and currency chaos, it's important to remember that Brazil also knows how to celebrate. And what better way to celebrate special occasions than by minting commemorative coins? From the Olympics to historical anniversaries, Brazil has a knack for immortalizing important events in shiny metal discs. These coins are like little pieces of history, each one telling a story of Brazil's past, present, and future. Sure, they might not be worth a whole lot in terms of actual purchasing power, but hey, at least they look pretty in a display case. Remember how we talked about the Cruzeiro being like that guest who overstays their welcome? Well, in 1967, the Brazilian government decided to invite that guest back for round 2, introducing the Cruzeiro Novo. It was like watching a bad sequel to a movie you never wanted to see in the first place. The Cruzeiro Novo was essentially just the old Cruzeiro with a fresh coat of paint and a slightly different name. Unsurprisingly, it suffered from many of the same problems as its predecessor, namely rampant inflation and a general lack of public confidence. It was clear that Brazil needed a more permanent solution to its economic woes, but that solution was still a few decades away. You know that saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again? Well, the Brazilian government apparently took that to heart when it came to the Cruzeiro. In 1990, just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water, they decided to reintroduce the Cruzeiro. Yes, you heard that right. The currency that had become synonymous with economic instability was back, baby. Unsurprisingly, it didn't go well. The Cruzeiro picked up right where it left off, presiding over yet another period of hyperinflation and economic chaos. Last but not least, we have the Cruzado, a currency so short-lived it makes the Cruzeiro real look like a model of stability. Introduced in 1986, the Cruzado was part of a larger economic plan that can only be described as ambitious, which is a polite way of saying completely bonkers. The plan involved freezing prices, wages, and exchange rates, which sounds like a good idea in theory, but in practice it's about as effective as trying to hold back a tsunami with a screen door. Predictably, the plan backfired spectacularly, leading to shortages, black markets, and a whole lot of economic confusion. The Cruzado was eventually replaced by, you guessed it, the Cruzeiro, which, let's face it, was about as surprising as the sun rising in the east. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of Brazil's tumultuous relationship with its own currency. It's enough to make you want to bury your savings in your backyard and start bartering for goods and services like it's 1899. But hey, at least it makes for a fascinating story, right? From the colonial era to the modern day, Brazil's currency has been on a wild ride, reflecting the country's own economic and political ups and downs. And who knows what the future holds. One thing's for sure, when it comes to Brazilian currency, you can always expect the unexpected. Just don't be surprised if they introduce a new currency next week backed by coffee beans and carnival beads. It wouldn't be the craziest thing to happen in Brazil's economic history.